So what happens if you want to show content determined by some kind of user submitted value? And by that, I mean, for example, I want to show the page cats, and I have a query string parameter here, cats, or I can show dogs, and that basically dynamically gives me a page based on what I have entered. Now, there is a massive problem with this, depending on the implementation, but we're going to look at a common implementation of doing this to dynamically show pages within some kind of template. So let's head over to the code and we'll see how this is currently working. Now at the top here, I've just got an if statement. It's checking if that show inside of the get superglobal is set. If it's not, we just kill the page. Then all we do is we pluck that value from the superglobal array, the get superglobal, and we now have that value to show. And then what we're doing is we're creating a content variable. We're using the PHP file get contents function to basically go into the content directory, which is over here, and it's going to substitute in the value provided by the user, and then it's going to append on a PHP extension. So if we, for example, in this case had dogs, we would end up with content/dogs.php, which exists here, so we can then go ahead and show it to the user. Now, there's a massive problem with doing this, and essentially we're going to demonstrate how we can get access to some kind of private file using this method. So inside of this kind of mock application structure I have an app folder, which is outside of the content directory. It's important to know. And we have db.php. This is just a database connection, much like you'd find in any application. And it obviously contains sensitive information. Now, you might be thinking, well, over on index.php, because I'm going into the content directory and I'm appending on a PHP extension here with the value that's provided by the user, there's no problem here. We're inside of the content directory, we're safe. As long as I don't put anything that shouldn't be seen in the content directory, then we're okay. But that is not the case, because obviously with file get contents, it works with traversing directories as well, and that includes going back a directory. So what we can actually do here is let's echo out or kill this show value. So you can see here that we get dogs. In fact, let's do that on this. So let's substitute that in there. And there we go. So you've got contents.dogs.php. Now what happens if I do 2 dots and back a directory, and then I go into app and I type db, not with the PHP extension, just db. What that's done is PHP will now require in content, back a directory. So if we look at our directory structure, we're coming out into this main security directory. Then we're going back into the app directory, so this one, and then we are showing db, we're appending on a PHP extension. I'll assume for the case of working with this, you'll be using a PHP extension for a database include, and there's nothing wrong with doing that. But now what we're doing is this is the file path we're including. So let's get rid of this die here and we'll see what happens. Well, it looks like nothing has happened, but if we go ahead and view the page source, you can actually see here that we have a PHP tag, we have that full source code, because what we're actually doing with the file get contents is we're reading the contents of a file. This won't be protected. Your users will be able to see, or your attacker will be able to see this content because it's the actual contents of the file. Now you might be thinking, well, isn't it the case that a user could then just access this anyway? Well, really, these kind of files should be outside of the publicly accessible directory. But anyway, even if we were to go over to app.db.php, obviously viewing the page source, we don't see anything because that file has been compiled on the server side by PHP, and we don't actually see the contents of the file. So you might be thinking, well, how can I use maybe a different function or a different method to actually grab content dynamically like this? Now, my strong advice would be just don't do this at all. It's not worth risking using any other method, trying to kind of sanitize this data in order to do this. What you're doing here is you have a line of code which could potentially reveal any file contents on your, first of all, in your project, let alone your server. So if you do absolutely need to use this method, I'm going to show you a way that you can actually detect whether you have some content in there that is allowed, which we need to keep up to date. However, like I said, I recommend you don't do this at all. So let's take a look at how we might kind of filter this out. We know that we have two files in here, cats and dogs, and all we really need to do is go ahead and create some kind of allowed array. So if we create an array here with cats and a value dogs, we know that the value that the user submits, so let's go back to our show equals, and we'll go ahead and put cats in there. We know that it can either be the string cats or the string dogs. So all we need to do here is when we're grabbing the content, we just need to use the inArray function, and I'm using a ternary operator here. So if it's inArray, so if show is in the allowed array, we want to grab the file contents. Otherwise, we just want an empty string. So that's all this line does just here. And that means that cats will work. That means that dogs will work. It means that if we provide any other characters like a space, that won't work. And of course, if we do something like /appdb, that again will not work. We'll just get an empty string. So although this is one way that you could filter out the content dynamically provided by a user in order to include a file, it's always a good idea to just not implement this at all. There are plenty of other ways to do this, including just creating a new file to show this content, using proper templating so you don't have to get around templating by dynamically including content from include files, and of course you can always use routing if you're working inside of a framework. So there's a little advice on including files based on user provided content.